So you want to know how to grade like this. Or this. How's it going? My name is Bowen Moreno. I'm a cinematographer, editor, and colorist, and today I wanted to talk about how you can achieve the film look in DaVinci Resolve. If you're here, it's because you have good taste and you like analog. The good thing is, so do I, and I've been trying to figure out how to replicate that look digitally for some time now. Although I would much rather shoot real film any day, it's very expensive. With the release of a lot of these new 8K cameras and above, the priority has shifted from getting a more filmic look to something that's just digital. And throughout the last couple of years, it's just been less of a priority to make that film look inherent to a lot of the new digital sensors. Now, this look can only truly be achieved through shooting on the medium. Some people would describe it as organic, as there are natural mistakes and inaccuracies to it. I can finally recommend a tool that can replicate these inaccuracies in a really cool way. Dehancer did give me a review copy for this video, but I will say I've been using this program long before I reached out to them. So why would you use Dehancer over LUTs or DaVinci Resolve's built-in tools? See, of course, I wouldn't recommend this tool if I didn't think it was necessary, since there are so many tools that you can use within DaVinci Resolve. But there are some tools in Dehancer that DaVinci Resolve just doesn't have. With a LUT, it's just a table of locked-in color values. You can't individually change the characteristics of everything that goes into the LUT. Dehancer is sort of your one-stop shop to build that LUT. It applies each effect in the proper order of the pipeline, and it emulates the main characteristics of film. If you were to just use a LUT, you wouldn't be able to achieve all the features that Dehancer gets you, like film grain, bloom, halation, film breadth, gate weave, and vignette. You could build this look out with multiple nodes, adjustment layers, multiple video layers, but even then, it doesn't quite get you as close as what I think Dehancer does. With Dehancer, all these effects are built in the OFX page. This is the way that I like to do things. It's going to be different for everybody. Hopefully you can learn something from it. So here's a shot from a short film I shot recently. If I were to just go in here and apply the Dehancer plugin, that's one way you could start out. Obviously, it's going to look a little weird right off the bat, but what you could do is choose your source of your camera. So I could choose my camera and then select Blackmagic Design, and I could select the Pocket 6K, and I could select Gen 4 ISO Film 400, and then I could kind of start messing with this a little bit and kind of get it to a good place, and that's one way I could do it. Or you can also see that you can start with just a general Rec 709 input, which means right now my input of my camera is in Blackmagic Film Log. So I'm going to need to convert this to Rec 709. So this is the way that I usually like to do things. So I'm just going to go to Color Space Transform. So right now my timeline color space is in Rec 709 Gamma 2.4 and output is 2.4. So I'm just going to put my input here as what I shot it in, which is Blackmagic Film Gen 5. And I could also go over and select Blackmagic Pocket 4K Film Gen 4 because I don't think there's a Gen 5 option. Everything should be good with tone mapping and gamut mapping already. I tend to trust it. And then now I'm going to go ahead and add the Dehancer plugin. All right, so now we're within the Dehancer plugin. So it's pretty simple up front, right? You have your input. So right now we're in Rec 709, that should be correct. And you're gonna have your standard tools. So you could do exposure, temperature, tint, defringe. So these are similar tools that you'd be able to work with straight out of Resolve. The good thing about this here is when you work with all these tools in Dehancer, it applies it in the appropriate order. So I do like to kind of work with in Dehancer if I'm going to do a full grade in it. Sometimes I'll do a mixture of both of working with Dehancer and my own nodes, but for the sake of demonstration here, I wanted to go ahead and just fully use Dehancer for this first shot. The exposure looks pretty good to me already. I'm not going to adjust that too much, but let's just kind of adjust the temperature. Right, let's get the tint looking nice. Right about there. So expand is where you can adjust your black and white points to fit within your color range. So I'm just gonna go a little bit there with my black, raise the whites up a tiny bit. As you can see, we are in a film profile. We're in Kodak Vision 3 250D. So if you wanted to, you can kind of take a look through all of these. They're gonna have different temperatures and contrast, so you have to adjust that after usually. Let's go ahead and check Ektachrome. Okay. Here's Cinestill. So I'm just scrolling through all of them. I'm gonna find one that kind of works for this image. Right off the bat, I'm already liking the way that this is looking. So this is Agfa Color Portrait. So you can also push and pull your film, which is the process of overdeveloping or underdeveloping your film. So I'm just gonna push it. Let's push it a stop and a half. Now I might just take my contrast and deepen it a little bit more. And we're already looking really, really nice. So every print medium also has its own tint, latitude, and contrast curve that makes it a useful creative tool. Linear is going to be a more pure profile. There's going to be no like added colors to the overall look. Whereas with something like Fujifilm 3513 print or Kodak 2383, they have sort of this punchy look to it. So obviously I might want to dial it back in the print stage here. So you can kind of see it has a different effect though if you were to adjust these tools at this stage. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Kodak 2383, which I know is sort of a punchier look. And our contrast is a little hot right now. Color density I might increase. And then I might go back up here and just adjust our temperatures to get that looking right. Okay, so that's Kodak print film. But let's just go back to linear because I like the way that that was looking. So these exposure, contrast, density, and saturation tools are going to kind of emulate what happens in the printing stage of the process. So if you were to adjust the exposure, it's going to adjust your overall contrast as well. And same kind of goes with the color density. So with color density, it's not going to saturate everything equally, sort of doing the lower end first. So this could be good for like final corrections. It's already looking really nice. And then with the analog range limiter, it's going to kind of decrease that total contrast again. It's going to bring everything within our waveform. So if you could see like my bottom part of the waveform is falling out of range, but if I were to hit analog range limiter, it brings it all in again, which for the sake, we're going to leave that off. So color head is sort of emulating printer lights. I actually really like the way that this tool works. So I can just change the levels of the red. You see it's kind of adding it into the image a little bit more. I'm going to take it away. Let's move it towards red, so that's towards green, and that's towards red. A little bit more of that. And you can kind of color your midtones, highlights, and shadows with these tools right here. So I'll just kind of adjust it. Yeah, I like when this adds like a bit of red to the window, where this is adding more of a blue. I actually like the blue right here. I think it gives us a nice contrast. So here's without and with. So that helped us get some blue into our window area. And then of course we get to our grain settings. So the grain in Dehancer is going to work a lot differently than the DaVinci Resolve built-in grain, which I think is one of the big selling points of this plugin, where DaVinci Resolve grain is just going to apply a layer to the entire image equally. The film grain here in Dehancer lets you selectively choose where you apply the grain. So you can put more in the shadows, more in the midtones, more in the highlights. You have extreme control of the chroma and then even the resolution of the film. And I'll just play it so you can kind of see what the grain is doing. Right now I think the grain looks nice, but I'm just going to decrease the amount a tiny bit. Yeah, that looks great. Here's our highlights, and I can just add more grain to our highlights, which is kind of cool. So now our highlights are really going to have that effect. And then we can add some to our shadows, which kind of looks like this area over here. So let's take it away actually. See, it's very effective. So I'm actually going to take some away from the shadows. And then the midtones, I'm going to even out just a little bit more. So you get extreme control over the grain structure here. It's really fantastic. One of my favorite tools here, like we talked about earlier, is the halation. This is kind of where I'm seeing it first in the eyes. So disabled and enabled, right? So I'm just going to amplify it. I'm going to increase the impact. So with the limiter set at 0, that means even the weakest elements in the image are going to be able to show the halation. Background gain is going to allow us to set the range for the background tones on where the halation is going to become visible. The smoothness controls the distribution of the halation effect between the large and small sources. Local diffusion defines how far the light spreads. Global diffusion is going to control the degree of the secondary glare. Let's go ahead and increase the local diffusion. And the global diffusion, you can kind of see what that's doing when I go back here. So this is affecting way too much of her skin tones, right? So I'm just going to let that stay low. But this local one is adding just a nice subtlety to her eye over here. And then amplify is going to make the effect more pronounced. So I'm just going to increase that. And of course, you can kind of change the color of the halation. Right now, it's just set on this red. And then impact is pretty much opacity. That's right, so we'll go to 100% opacity. And yeah, we're kind of seeing it on her neckline too, over here. So enabled, disabled. I'll probably just decrease the diffusion. Try to get to a subtle place. You don't want to go overboard with this one or it goes crazy. And then bloom. So even though I did shoot this image with the Pro Mist filter on, bloom has a different effect. So it's not necessarily a Pro Mist filter. It's going to affect only the brightest areas of the image, and then you can sort of set the threshold. So highlights is going to be the sensitivity or threshold. So the higher the value, the more tonal range the bloom's going to get. And source limiter is where you're going to limit unwanted areas from getting the bloom. Details is kind of going to make the effect more defined on smaller areas rather than kind of take effect on the entire image itself. So if I enable it and disable it, I kind of see some of it taking place on her chin, on this little line right here, right? And then sort of near the eyes too. But again, this isn't the best image to do it. It's already kind of bloomy. So this is a great tool for realistic looking bloom, which is one of the characteristics of film. So typically Vignette is going to be sort of a negative after effect of the characteristics of the lens, but it's also a great creative tool. So if I can just enable that, and you can see it sort of focuses our attention on the subject. So I'm just gonna leave that on. You can decrease the feather, you can increase it, you can change the size. This tool is pretty self-explanatory. And of course the exposure of the vignette. Okay, so film breadth is one of my favorite effects here, and I think it really does sell the look of it. So the film breadth is sort of this like accidental change of exposure and contrast and color from frame to frame. It can happen in the development process. It can also happen when the film moves through the gate. It can also happen with the shutter. It happens in different circumstances, but let's just turn it on real quick. So you might see a little bit of this like flicker, right? If I turn the period down, you'll probably notice it more. There we go. So it's kind of flickering on us. I can increase that so you really start to see it, right? But that's looking like an old kind of period piece. So we probably only want it to be at like 3. And gate weave is that next effect that's really going to breathe some life into the film. Gate weave is sort of the mechanical swinging as the film is being pulled through a projector or film camera. So it'll kind of like move the image around a little bit. So I'm going to enable that. So with the lower period, there's going to be more bumps in the playback. You sort of see it moving around. So if I really increase these translations, you'll see it happening. So this is kind of what it's doing, but on a really small scale. And of course, there's some other nice tools in here to kind of monitor your exposures. This is kind of nice to use in addition to your waveform. This is sort of where I like to expose everything. And then the output, you can determine the total impact of the effects. So here's with no dehancer, and here's with. So maybe I'll put it like right there. Yeah, looks great. It can also output a LUT, which is really good for the DIT stage of production, or also just for dailies or on-set monitoring. It's not going to allow you to do everything that Dehancer can, so keep that in mind. In most cases, normal mode, you're not going to notice any visual compromises. High is going to render everything slower, which looks like my computer can handle right now, so we'll leave it on high. And yeah, I think this image is looking really good. So again, no dehancer, with. I'm doing that with Control D to turn my node off and on. So really, really powerful tool that we're using here. Yeah, let's just move on to another shot. So let's hit Command S for a new node, or I think that's Alt S if you're on Mac. Drag up Dehancer. And yeah, let's start this off. So I want to try a different film stock, something Kodak. Let's do Vision 250D since we shot this in daylight. Or if you do tungsten, you'd just have to keep that in mind with your temperature. So let's just adjust the temperature, get those waveforms sort of matching a little bit more in the middle. And same thing with tint. We're just eyeballing it here for demonstration. Let's increase the exposure. All right, let's lower our black point. Increase our white point. Yeah, it's more crunchy now. We still want to have detail, right, in these mountains. So for now, I'm just going to go ahead and turn down our film grain quite a bit there. So we're pretty good. I might even try the analog range limiter just to kind of limit us a little bit more. Let's turn our total contrast up. That's pretty good. Saturation looks good. I really like the way that this effect looks, so I'm just gonna increase it. And let's try some Kodak 2383. So right off the bat, you're gonna notice it's pretty crunchy. So I'm just gonna go back up here and I'm gonna decrease our black, decrease that white point before clipping. And then I'm going to do the same thing with total contrast. And color density is looking good. And let's just make it a little bit warmer. I sort of like something like that where the clouds still have a little bit of warmth to them. So that brings me to the color head, right? So we can increase the blues, decrease the blues a little bit. I like it decreased. We can add some magenta in. We can change the red value. And here's without and with. It's really subtle so far, but this is where it's a little bit more fun. So with the highlights tone, I can go push it towards blue or push it towards red. Or push it towards orange a little bit. Midtones, warm up. Shadows, also gonna warm up a little bit. Yeah, that's looking really nice. And at this point, I can just enable halation just to get a little bit on the water. You'll kind of see it on these waves here if I disable it and enable it again. Increase the amplify. Actually, let's increase the global diffusion. Local diffusion. Yeah, now you kind of see it along these edges here. So lots of halation now, maybe a little bit too much. Definitely a little bit too much, that's okay. We'll just decrease the impact. Great, this is looking pretty cool. And I don't want to do any bloom for this one. I might want some vignette or I might not. Probably no vignette here. And I think it could probably use just a tiny bit more saturation. So maybe I'll just create a node right here for saturation. Just increase it a tiny bit more. Here's our shot. Let's just play that back. So again, that was pretty quick. Usually I'd take a little bit more time on that, but just wanted to run through it. All right, here's another one that I thought would be fun to play with. So we are on a color space transform again, just inputting black magic, and we're just outputting to Rec 709. Gonna add a node, scroll down, and go to Dehancer. Okay, so let's check it out. I'm gonna zoom in here. All right, so this one's already looking like it's pretty close. We're on the Kodak Vision 3. Portrait's nice and soft, actually. Portrait 160 has always been a favorite of mine. Here's Kodak Gold. This is based on photography film stocks, but same thing. We're all getting the same place anyways. But let's choose Kodak Portrait 160, increase the exposure comp a tiny bit. Looking good so far. Decreasing that black point, increasing the white. Let's maybe just go ahead and decrease the contrast. We're kind of undoing what we've done, but that's all right. And then let's push some colors back in. So push the highlights towards like that orange red. And then let's do a little bit of blue in the midtones. So here's without and with Dehancer. So So let's actually reset that one with. Just check out the grain structure. Yeah. I think it looks fantastic so far. I probably wouldn't do too much more to this. I mean, of course, we can try adding some bloom. I'm just kind of adding a lot of it right now. With. You can see it kind of taking effect there. And then let's add a vignette. I think this one would be nice with a vignette. Here's a little night scene type spec ad I was working on. Now I'm doing this one because I think the halation might look really nice on it. Obviously we're in a weird starting place, so let's just fix it up a tiny bit. Let's get that temperature dialed in. Let's get it closer to how I remember shooting it. I'm gonna actually try Cineon for this because I think it would look nice. All right, so let's just decrease the black. Increase the white. I'm just going in here, I'm still in Cineon. I'm just gonna increase the color density. I just changed some of these color head tones a little bit more red or a little bit less in the midtones. Shadows, tiny bit red, not too much. And then highlights. Kind of reminds me of messing with the log wheels. I think it works similarly. And then we can enable our halation, which I think is gonna look nice on this one. Amplify that, increase the impact, the diffusion. You can really see it on this plant here. Lots of halation. This one I'm going for more of a stylized look anyways. Just gonna add a quick node, and let's just increase the saturation. Tiny bit more. So here's no dehancer with dehancer. Let's turn off these two nodes. So just color space transform with dehancer, with no dehancer, and width. In my opinion, Dehancer is the best at what it does so far as a film emulation plugin goes. To do this on your own, it's just going to be very time consuming. I've done it plenty of times and I can assure you that it is. While the plugin is expensive, I think convenience is worth it at the end of the day. And that's what you're paying for. That's what we're paying the big bucks for. So go ahead and check out Dehancer. I have a link in the description. It is an affiliate link, so it does help out the channel. I really appreciate it. If you liked this video, then leave a like, do a sub.